Generational Differences, presented by Dr. Rosa, Keiser University.
All right, well, thank you again. So we're going to go through generational differences and talk about the different generations that are in the workplace. There's lots of research going on, and I'm sure you've come across articles that talk about millennials, Generation Z, and this is what comprises the parents. When you're working with parents, your fellow teachers, your students, guidance counselors, principals, superintendents. The reality is there could be a lot of different generations. So there is research, because this is now considered an interest from a diversity perspective, where it's important that we understand all our perspectives and then see what lens we're looking through, and then be able to work together and use everybody's strengths. With generational differences, even though I'm going to go through some factual information about the characteristics of each generation, keep in mind really how you define and how you associate yourself is what generation you are. So just because you were born a certain year doesn't mean you believe a certain way. It's all about what you relate to and what you associate with. So our objectives today are going to be to examine demographic information about the different generations in education, and then some strategies, when you know a little bit about where people are coming from, that are going to be how you can strategize to help communicate better with different generations. And like I said previously, just because, these are just general overviews of the different generations, that doesn't mean that every single person is that way. This is just a rough idea of where to start with, but each person is an individual, and when in doubt, just ask a person what their beliefs are, or why they did what they did, or why they come to the decisions that they make. So here's a little picture or an image that shows what our generations, what the workforce could look like, especially now that baby boomers are prolonging their retirement, and our anxious millennials, and now our Generation Z are anxious to get started in the workplace. So this is a depiction of the workplace and how the different generations are all there and accustomed to what they were influenced by growing up. So we're going to take a little quiz, a little assessment. There's going to be, I believe, about 13 questions. So you can either put, if you have paper and pencil, you can do it that way, or you can put notes on your phone, however you want to do it, or you could just tally up in your head. You're going to count how many times you select A, how many times you select B, how many times you select C, and how many times you select D. So with question number 1, your generation spent Saturday nights and either A, at the local movies and then the drugstore, B, at the bowling alley with your friends, C, dragging Main Street in your hot rod listening to Blondie, or D, talking to the internet with someone from China. So select one of those, write it down, and just keep a note. So that's question number 1 of what letter you chose, A, B, C, or D. Question number 2, one of your generation's favorite musician is A, Glenn Miller, B, The Beatles, C, Madonna, or D, Usher. So one of your generation's favorite musicians, A, B, C, or D. A, Glenn Miller, B, Beatles, C, Madonna, D, Usher. 3, the first thing my generation wanted to buy was A, home, B, a car, C, a company, D, a personal computer. So you'll select A, B, C, or D. The first thing my generation wanted to buy was a home, A, B, a car, C, a company, D, a personal computer. Number 4, birthday parties in my generation were A, only for rich people, B, the day I got to pick what meal and cake I wanted, C, for me to come up with a cool new theme each year, or D, consisted of a jumping castle, a DJ, and a caterer. Number 5, and if you need me to repeat something, because you're listening to this and not watching it, then just put that on the chat, and one of the facilitators will tell me I need to repeat it. Number 5, my favorite childhood toy of my generation, A, marbles, B, hula hoop, C, Barbie and G.I. Joe, and D, a Game Boy / PlayStation. So what was your favorite childhood toy of your generation, you believe? 6, a favorite childhood drink of my generation was A, Coca-Cola, B, Kool-Aid, C, anything diet, or D, Starbucks. Question 7. People in my generation dream to become a famous sports star like A, Babe Ruth, B, Joe Namath, C, Michael Jordan, or D, Tiger Woods. Question 8. The worst fashion mistake my generation made was A, double knit, B, bell bottoms, C, bangs that reach Mars, or D, baggy low-riding pants. Question 9, when my generation thinks of their father, they think about A, the good care he provided for my mom and siblings, B, the fun family vacations he took us on, C, when he left, D, my real dad or stepdads. Ten, if my generation got into trouble, our moms would A, spank us, B, say, wait until your father gets home, C, put us into timeout, or D, ignore me until she finds a solution in a self-help book. Question 11. Brothers, sisters in my generation, A, played with me and helped me do chores. B, were fun till I became a teen. C, I see once a year we both are so busy. And D, which one, step or real? Question 12, one of my generation's daily chores might have included A, setting the table or heating water to wash the dishes, B, to wash or dry dishes, C, loading, unloading the dishwasher, or D, what dishes? We use paper plates. And then the final question is, when my generation grew up, we wanted to be a doctor, B, the president, C, an entrepreneur, or D, a celebrity. So that's the last question. So if you can want to tally up your letters. Count how many A's you selected, how many B's you selected, how many C's you selected, and how many D's selected. And depending on your responses, that'll tell you what generation you are most associated with. And we're going to get to that in just a couple of more slides. So hold on to those answers. But first, let's define what a generation is. So a generation is defined as a group of people defined by age boundaries, those who were born during a certain area. And there is some, when you look at the research and you look at all the research on generations, there are some varying years that people switch around. But in general, I presented you what is most common in the research. And a generation shares similar experiences growing up, and their values and attitudes tends to be similar. And just to reinforce, why are we studying this generations? Why are we talking about it today? Here are some statistics that I think are interesting and ones that you're already experiencing, as teachers in middle school and high school, where you see the more experienced teachers, and you also see novice teachers, first-year teachers that are coming into the workplace. So by 2020, there'll be 5 generations in the workplace. Today, 1 in 3 employees report to someone younger. Today, 1 in 7 employees reports to someone a full decade younger. And then age and experience are no longer indications of role. So that is a reality that wasn't the case years ago. So here are the types of generations. So if you scored mostly A's in your assessment, then you would be considered part of the silent generation and traditionalists born pre-1945 who believed in hard work. And once again, this is about what you associate with. The last time I did this seminar, there was someone who was like 22 years old. No, he was about 27 years old. And he all his scores are for the silent generation. So, and as we were going through the presentation, he realized that, well, that was what he associates with. So it's all about who you associate with. Baby boomers, if you pick a lot of Bs, then you most associate with baby boomers, and that's 1946 to 1965 roughly. And you're very a loyal generation. If you picked a lot of Cs, you'd be Generation X, 1966 to 1979, and believe in work-life balance. That is where I fall in, and those who know me know I truly believe in work-life balance. And then D, if you pick D, and then you are mostly associated with Generation Y, millennials, and who are all about innovation and change. This assessment didn't incorporate Generation Z, but they would be people who were born from 2000 to the present. There is some literature that says early as 1995, but a majority of literature says 2000 to the present, and they, believe it or not, have an optimistic point of view. So if you could put in the chat maybe what you came up with, so we can get a feel of what our participants are associating themselves with. All right, so we have some fairly equal. All right, B and C. Rita, thank you. Deborah, B and A, D, B and A. Dr. Miller, B and D. Christine, baby boomer. So so we have a variety right here. So that's going to be very interesting. And Lisa, Generation X, however, a number of questions I wasn't able to answer. Well, and that's perfectly fine. This is just a small snapshot, a little fun assessment just to get people in the right frame of mind. There could be, none of these things could be applicable to you, all the questions and the responses. So it's perfectly fine. So I thank you for taking that. Oh, so what you did on Saturday night wasn't there. Well, I'm sure it was reading books and being very good and a very nice person. All right, so as we go to the rest of the presentation, just have these responses in mind. All right, so we're going to go through each generation and what are some of their characteristics. And I want you to think about in your workplace, write down in your, either on paper or mentally in your head, who are some of these people that you think maybe perhaps are in this age group, and if they follow these characteristics. So traditionalists, and we talked before 1945, so they were influenced by depression. The Great Depression happened at this time, and that's going to really factor into how millennials behave today. So they were influenced by the Depression, military draft, atom bomb, and global wars. So the fact that they were influenced by the Great Depression means that they were nickel and diming, prepared. They didn't know that, if there would be a depression again. So they really saw hard times. And these hard times impacted the baby boomers, which we're going to talk about. So they believe very hierarchy and rules. Dedication and sacrifice are measures of success. War was a predominant theme and experience with this generation. So it was very much about authority. You never question authority. You're conservatives just in case of that depression, because of that depression. And if it's going to happen again, you make do with what you do. And I see this, with my mother. She will just what she has is what she has. If there's only one peanut butter and jelly sandwich and two breads, well, then that's what we're eating. And then children should be seen and not heard. So very authoritative. And so think about that when you're in your classroom, when you're with the students, and the frame of mind is, children should be seen and not heard. So think about that. Put that in your wheelhouse. All right, so then there are the baby boomers. And some of you said you associated with B. So influenced by civil rights, Vietnam, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and space travel. Of course, not all in that order, and not everyone has. These are just some things that may have influenced. So because it was just so free-flowing and wonderful, there was a booming birth rate, and hence baby boomers. Fewer rules and nurturing environment. Baby boomers live to work, so they really define work by the number of hours. Reflecting on your school and your classrooms and your dynamics, are there people that are the watching the hours and counting the hours and seeing, observing how long everyone works and wants to be there early and stay there late? So this would be that generation. And that's what success is the amount of hours you work. They're very competitive, question everything. Baby boomers are attributed with creating the culture of meetings. Well, let's have a meeting, let's have a committee, let's talk about it, let's brainstorm. Idealistic, competitive, self-reliant, independent. They play well with others. Because of the generation, women were not as seen, I guess, or it wasn't as women were still seen as, staying in the home and taking care of the children with this generation, even though there was a start of a women's movement, but mostly it was about stay-at-home moms. They were optimistic and once again, desire to stand out and be defined by professional accomplishments. And that goes back to the long hours and the hard work. So this is the baby boomer. And so think about if you're a baby boomer, if this applies to you. So for those of you in the chat who are baby boomers, is there anything about this that stands out or is associated? Deborah says all of it, so true. All right, very good, Deborah. You're owning your generation. You're not in denial. But none of your friends were stay-at-home moms. That's good. Christine, none of them. No. Yeah, well, some of these are going to reach you, some of them are not. All situational. All right, next. Generation X. So I think this is when even the start of generations started becoming in the vernacular, because people were just talking about Generation X, mostly because of MTV. But they were also influenced by turbulent economic times, divorce, AIDS, MTV was launched, cable, and then this is unfortunately a generation that also where we started to have missing children on milk cartons and those public safety announcements, do you know where your child is? So this is stuff that has influenced Generation X. Very skeptical about life, because remember, they were in with baby boomers who were free-going, the traditionalists who were very stern and stringent. So that had an impact on Generation X. But they're technologically savvy, independent. So a lot of this is where we start to, not as independent Generation Y, but they start to become independent problem solvers. And here's where we get the notion of work-life balance. Instead of living to work, working so that you can have that weekend. Very entrepreneurial, resourceful, and adaptive to change. So do we have any Generation X's on the participant? And if so, does any of this apply to you? Because I know there were some people that did relate to C. You could put that in the chat. And you guys can follow the chat so we can have some interaction. Yes, but I'm not that tech savvy. All right, Lisa, but you may be more tech savvy than a baby boomer, and you may not. It's all individual. All right, so here's, I throw in some funny cartoons and some funny stories here. So here's a depiction of a job interview for a Generation Xer. Are you ready to interview me now? Because I've been sitting here for 3 minutes, patiently listening to your inane blabbering. So speaks to the impatience and the the go direct to the point of a Generation Xer because of that MTV video generation. So Rita's on the cusp of baby boomer and Generation X. So I have many qualities of both. Excellent. So well, I'll share now. So I am supposed to be the Generation X, but I'm really more of Generation Z as I analyze my behavior. It could also be a midlife crisis. So it's one of those two. But right now, today, this moment, I am a Generation Z. All right, so Generation Y. Let's talk a little bit about Generation Y. And they're also called millennials. So that's probably the most common what you hear in the vernacular, Generation Y. And a lot of the studies and a lot of focus is on Generation Y because these Generation Y has come to the workforce at this moment. So they're influenced by the fall of the Berlin Wall. This generation saw 9/11, September 11th happened. 24/7 access to information. The internet actually started booming. Drugs and gangs were prevalent in inner cities. And then some natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, and then school shootings. So this generation has had to process and deal with a lot. But as a result, they do believe in collaboration. They are an energetic group. Because most of their parents were live to work and work to live, now this generation of the millennials are live for me. And because of the introduction of social media and all the devices, they see themselves as multitask, attention seekers, impatient, because they want it and they want it now. And this is not a generation that stays in their job long because they want promotions right away. So you may have some teachers who move around, and there is an increase in teacher leaving the profession or just switching to different schools because this generation is accustomed to having multiple job changes and wanting that next promotion right now, right away.
Dr. Rosa, we have a question from Deborah regarding just that. She asked, working with Generation X and Y regarding the work-life balance, and as a baby boomer in the workplace, it's interesting their attitudes about interacting with social media while on the clock. Any ideas? How can employers address this challenge?
Well, excellent. So I would need to reframe that and have you think, well, why is it a challenge if they're getting their work done and then they're taking time to, check in, because this is their reality. So if you think it is an issue, of course, you would have a group conversation about the use of technology and how unprofessional that may seem. But I would also challenge you that if this generation, if social media is you eat, you breathe, and you check your Instagram, then is there some harm in this generation doing that as long as the work is getting done? So think about that. All right. Excellent question. So it's all about, this entire time, thinking about, is there some legitimacy, trying to see it through the other generation's eyes? But if it's definitely a work performance issue, then obviously a conversation would need to occur and some rules happening for the school. Moving, impatient, like I said, they embrace change, realistic, confident, entitled. And a lot of this is because of reflecting on the influence of the traditionalists and the baby boomers, who were so ready for another economic downturn. So Generation X and to an extent Generation Y and to an extent Generation X, they feel that they have been shortchanged, that they were deprived, and whether it's real or not, they feel like they had to count coupons. They didn't know when there was food on the table, whether that was real or not. So now they have turned around and they have provided everything for their son and daughters, because they don't want them to have the life that they had. And this is what we're seeing with Generation Z and some of them who are on the cusp of Generation Y, a generation that is getting everything because the generation before them felt like they were deprived and counting every penny. And this is where you also get the term helicopter parents, because there are very much, when they have become parents and they feel, whether rightfully or wrongly, that they've been ignored, they are now in your classrooms probably, and even at the higher education level as well. They are in your classrooms trying to find out everything about their parents, about their children, and solve it, and it may be the teacher's fault. And we talked a lot about this in our conflict resolution, providing tips on our previous webinar, so you want to check that out on if you're having some challenges with parents. What are some tips to help with that? So another interesting quote associated with millennials: they're going to be the first in modern era to have higher levels of student loan debt, poverty and unemployment, and lower levels of wealth and personal income than any other generation at the same stage of life. And this harks back to what I just previously said, because they felt like they were had to go through so much traumatic savings and time. They are living it up. And taking out those student loans so that they can use education for advancement. And as of now, what we're seeing, and there are different studies that show otherwise, but as of now, what we're seeing is this phenomenon here. And it's going to sound like I'm talking negatively about generations, especially when we get to Generation Z. But every generation, the previous generation, has talked bad about or has pointed out some of the negatives. And at the end of the day, everyone's going to survive. So I'm going back to the chat here. Okay, so correct there. Economic deadline. All right, so Deborah agrees. Thank you. All right, some more about Generation Y. This is something what they would say. They keep telling me, here's what you get in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but they expect me to come back to work tomorrow. What do I get tomorrow? So it's that social media, it's that media attention, and the whole notion of not everyone gets a trophy, because some would say in society, the notion in schools was to give the outstanding student of the year award, and then the runner up, and then third place. I remember going to my nephew's school, and there was the honor roll, but then there was the mid honor roll, and then there was the lower of the honor roll, but you were still on the honor roll, and then there was the most improved. So some teachers or some principals who are of this generation may be the ones that are instilling these policies. And it may not be, there's no right or wrong, but this is just for you to see where that motivation or where that thinking is coming from. And here it is. These are some slides. If you're watching, I think the PowerPoint's already in there, but you may want to take a picture on your phone. So this is just when you're looking at these factors: job strength, outlook, view of authority, leadership, relationships. These are some things that are different or define the different generations. Yes, thank you for including that presentation. So job strength, outlook, like I said, view of authority. And this is, in your schools, you may see this, being traditionals, wanting respect and thinking that is what it should be, hierarchy, authority. Boomers, baby boomers, I love it or hate it, almost an extreme. Generation X, the MTV generation, really just unimpressed and unintimidated with authority. And then, believe it or not, millennials being very, very polite. And then leadership for traditionals that believe in hierarchy. Baby boomers are consensus, hence the meetings, because they want everyone to get along. Generation Xers, competence. So they're looking at the degree and the skills and knowledge. And then millennials, just by pulling together and everyone, you know, kumbaya. So these are in your school systems. Here's some more time on the job. And I think this is what has been disturbing and very prevalent in generational differences, and that these new generations don't just work, they work until they get it done. If it takes 10 hours, if it takes 20 hours, if it takes 60 hours. And I believe the traditionalists and the baby boomers are more counting the hours and want people at the job. You know, the millennials, they don't want to go to work. They want to work remotely. So you may have a millennial in your school who you're judging because they get there at 7 and then they leave at 3, whenever the start time, the end time, and that's it. You don't see them again. But that doesn't mean that they didn't get their job done during the day, or that they are not working from home. They may not want to do these extracurricular activities. So very something to definitely good. And for those of you who may be supervising or in the supervisor role, then you definitely want to look at the feedback criteria. For traditional, no news is good news. For the baby boomers, you know, once a year with documentation. Generation Xers will interrupt you and ask, you know, how are they doing? How are they doing? And then even to a more extreme, millennials want that feedback, you know, immediately, whenever they can get it, that's what they want. They want that constant attention that the internet, that the social media gives them. And then when we talk about Generation Z, well, that'll be a whole other, they want the feedback, but then when you tell them they can't handle it, they'll start crying, they're hurt. And this is just generally speaking, but think about if you have kids, that's who Generation Z is going to be, or the kids in your classroom, especially, yeah, if you're teaching middle school and high school, then these students, you're seeing them in your classroom and you're interacting with them. Work-life balance, we talked about that. And then just some more communication, face-to-face for traditionalists, baby boomers in a memo, Generation X want an email or a cell phone, and then millennials want text messages. I guess in this aspect, I identify more with a millennial because I'd rather get a text message than a phone call. Rewards. This is something important too. If you're in a leadership role or when you're with your students, how they want to be rewarded. Traditionalists just want, you know, a job well done. They know if they put in the hard work, then that's all they need. Baby boomers looking more for the titles and the money, maybe a nice office space, the corner office. For Generation X, you know, if you want to reward me, then just let me do what I'm going to do. And leave me, you know, give me minimal supervision and I'll be fine. And then millennials really want that, they want meaning and they want to make sure that their life has a purpose. And that is also why they leave jobs, because they've been there for 2 or 3 years and they really can't see what the purpose is, or they've absorbed the skills and knowledge and they're going to go somewhere else. All right, so let's see if now that we've talked a little bit about all this, and if you can in the chat just shed some thought on what do you like about your generation, what do you wish other generations understood, or what challenges do you face at your school that may have to do with your generation? And so if you want to see, I'll see if we get any chat participants, because I don't know if we can get any live talking, because I don't want to risk our technology here. But I guess, and more importantly, what challenges do you face at your school that may have to do with your generation? So I'll give some time for you to think about it if you have a legitimate something to share. If not, we'll move on with the presentation, but let me see. Oh. Anyone? All right. So also you can always feel free to email me as you're thinking about these questions. mrosa@kaiseruniversity.edu. So if there's something you want to talk about generations or challenges that you're facing, feel free to send me an email. All right, so now we have Generation Z, and those are two celebrities, one from Blackish and Grownish, and one from Stranger Things. These two females are now Generation Z. All right, so Generation Z, and these are in your classrooms. They're also nicknamed the touchpad or the I generation. Generation Z has never not had a computer. Generation Z has never not had access to over 80 cable channels. They've never picked up a phone, a traditional phone, put on a record player, a CD, never not had internet. So this is the generation that is in your classrooms. Let me look in the chat. So I am clicking on the chat here, and I do see some responses. Deborah said, designing a supervisory flow that allows for more immediate is the work assignment completed. Check-ins that are shorter and more frequent than how. Yes, those are excellent points. Social media is impacting students' sense of self. Yeah, and you see that on the news with our celebrities being impacted, and then students follow them as well. An annual, quarter, monthly reporting process. Yeah, and then that all depends. That reporting process probably will be shaped by the leader and the generation that they're responsible, they're in. So think about after this presentation is over, think about how the leadership in your school or your district, what their generation values are influencing the running and the everyday decisions of your school. Because we're all going to be bossed by Generation Z, and this is what we're going to have to deal with. So access to information anytime, anywhere, immediate gratification. These students, one concern is their critical thinking and their coping skills, because these students, all they have to do, if they're on an app and they don't like the app, they don't need to sit there and solve it, and all they need to do is delete the app and then find 20 other apps. So they're for immediate gratification. Searching for 15 seconds of fame. A lot of our generation, yes. What was that? Yeah. A lot of, is that a time up? No, I'm just kidding. A lot of the generation are celebrities in their own life. If they have Instagram or Snapchat, and they measure how many likes or how many followers they have. So just to get that 15 seconds of fame, and legitimately there are people that have become famous. I mean, you look at the Kardashians, you have Kylie Jenner, who just was announced as the youngest person to reach like $1 billion or something, she just got some accolade as being the youngest person to do something, and it was something about $1 billion. Nickname is Screenagers. I thought that was funny. Fake news, they now see fake news. They see these reports, and instead of just taking it with a grain of salt, they may see it as fake news, whether it is fake news or not. But on the positive side, they do believe that they can make the world a better place. They do want to make a difference, and they got that from their parents. They view life as the glass half full, and strong sense of career management, philanthropy, and entrepreneurship. The generations that are probably in your classrooms may or may not value education, and but definitely, for the most part, do want to be entrepreneurs. They don't want to work for anyone. They don't want to have their own hours. They want to start their businesses. And if you see that in your classrooms, then please put that in the chat. And this is because it's also going back to the parents, not that we're putting any blame here, but the parents have given them everything that they never had. And also doing some helicoptering. So this has helped to shade them, and that's the big concern about this generation. And so think about what this generation has been influenced so far. They saw an African-American president. they've seen same-sex marriage legalized, and then marijuana legalized in some states. As I've stated, family impacted by the Great Recession. So that way they are going to refrain from financial risk and debt, we think. The threat of foreign and domestic terrorism, and then movements such as #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, and then climate change, which we're hearing on the news right now. These are things the Generation Z has to worry about because of social media and because that it's so prevalent and it's on the news and there are a million different cable channels and the information is just nonstop in their face. They don't have to research. They can Google, they can talk to Siri, they can talk to Alexa. So artificial intelligence is also something that's impacting. So what are the challenges? And you're seeing this in your schools, I am sure. This generation, they need coping skills to deal with issues such as identity theft, something we all need to now be on the lookout for and look for alerting monitoring to tell us that. Cyberbullying, so students aren't getting into the classroom and not only being bullied in school, that we've seen an increase, but now students and even adults can just hide behind a social media, an account, not have to face someone, and then say some mean things. And then catfishing, pretending that you're someone but you're not that person. And it has resulted in increased levels of teen depression, loneliness, suicide, and mental health issues. Let me just go back to what I said before. Every generation has had their challenges. Every generation there's been a concern. But we're just seeing with this generation that we really need to pay attention because of the glorified nature of these negative consequences. So here are some, finally we're gonna end with some tips. So if you have traditionalists in your workplace, if they're the superintendent or the principal, or maybe just a teacher who's been there for years and loves the subject they're teaching, you wanna respect their experience, listen to what's worked or not in the past, recognize and reward their perseverance, using a personal touch, allowing for social skills in the workplace, provide traditional perks such as photos with key individuals. They may need help with social media, so you want to, or emails, they may be reluctant. And then again, they may not. My mother probably knows more about social media and how to fix technology than I do. So it all depends on the individual. Working with baby boomers, you want to acknowledge how they're important, acknowledge their contribution, let them know they are needed, especially as the younger generation is entering the workplace. Provide public recognition and help them gain that recognition, involve them, and acknowledge their hard work and their work ethic. With Generation X, if you're working with them or with parents that are from Generation X, if you're doing IEP meetings, you want to make sure that you involve them, you put all the options on the table so that they can make informed decisions with you. And you want to be prepared to answer why, why your child is not performing. And we talked about this in conflict resolution, you cannot take it personally. You got to put yourself in their shoes. And even if they're blaming the teacher, you want to just have a conversation, not take it personally. Present yourself as an information provider. You're just there in the best interest of the student. Use their peers as testimonies when possible. Enjoy work because they're going to enjoy work. Follow up with feedback. Just let them do it their way, unless it's violating policies. Provide them the technology needed. Remove unnecessary rules. Provide more frequent feedback, and allow time to have fun at work. If these are your coworkers, and they want to take that time, give them that time to have fun. Working with Generation Y, the generation that wants to make a difference and wants to have meaning. Offer customization, a plan specific to them. So if they want to create lesson plans, that are unique or incorporate technology. And so you want to maybe allow them to do that and to share it with others. Have them talk and with their peers and offer examples. Provide that information and guidance, especially to those new teachers. Be impressed with their decisions. Be open, fair, and honest. Tell them what they need to know. Don't beat around the bush. And then, help them deal with difficult people, especially, and also with Generation Z, because they are going to spend all their time. They may not even go to school or to be homeschooled or be in front of a computer, and that's taken away from their dealing with people. So if you have these, and if you're a school leader, or you have you advise a student organization or a parent-teacher association, you want to serve as a mentor and have these generations mentor each other by finding mutual interests, maybe having a younger generation mentor the older generation. And I use the term young and old relatively. You want to maintain communication and establish trust. So if you were thinking about doing that, having a mentor system, that's something that could work to your advantage. And Deborah has said, redesigning employee handbooks to address all these generation attributes. That's an excellent idea, Deborah. In fact, let's do it. Let's go into business. Let's tap into our Generation Y, go into business, be entrepreneurs, and let's do that all across the board. And let's make millions of dollars doing it. But of course, Deborah, you have to put my name as the co-author. All right, some final, hold on. All right, so this is some from book Retiring Generation Gap, How Employees Young and Old Can Find Common Ground. Keep in mind, at the end of the day, all generations have similar values. Everyone wants respect. Leaders must be trustworthy. Nobody likes change. Of course, how you deal with it is going to make you stand out. But at the end of the day, nobody likes change. Well, for the most part. Loyalty depends on context. So what you think is loyal is not going to be what a Generation Z thinks is loyal, especially when it comes to the amount of hours one is dedicated to a position. Everyone wants to learn and everyone likes feedback, but it's the extent and the amount and when you give the feedback that's going to be different for each generation. In the chat, Lisa said, good information for the VR pre-employment transition services peer mentors for working with the students and their families. Excellent, and we can do a more specific one for them if you think that would help. Just reach out to us. All right, so in summary, generational context is about common experiences. Communicate with your coworkers about their expectations and preferences. Differences should be celebrated. Remember, this is we did a workshop last week on creating an inclusive environment. I encourage you to watch that. But this is another component of being different. And these differences should be celebrated. There's more than one way approach to solve a problem. So if you're blaming the other generation, or judging or critiquing, thinking about, well, what is it that has influenced you? And maybe you could be more open. You want to mix and match project teams, so different generations are working together. And then at the end of the day, everybody's an individual. So while we can use this as a framework, we can't draw conclusions. So you want to know each person's strengths, personality, and aspiration.